Hello and welcome to our biology video presentation. Today we're going to be talking about cystic fibrosis, and some of the topics we'll cover includes the symptoms, genotype, and the pattern of inheritance. So the first topic we'll be covering is what is cystic fibrosis. Cystic fibrosis is a genetic disorder that affects mostly the lungs, but it can also affect the pancreas, liver, kidneys, and the intestines. Cystic fibrosis is inherited in an autosomal recessive manner, and it is caused by the presence of mutations in both copies of the gene for the CFTR protein. Those with a single working copy are carriers and are otherwise mostly healthy. Long-term issues include difficulty breathing and coughing up mucus as a result of frequent lung infections. The defective gene responsible for cystic fibrosis leads to the creation of thicker and stickier mucus that is difficult to cough out of the lungs. In addition to complications such as malnutrition, the most common cause of death in people who suffer from cystic fibrosis are respiratory problems.
These are the common signs and symptoms associated to cystic fibrosis. The first one would be respiratory signs and symptoms. The thick and sticky mucus associated with cystic fibrosis clogs the tubes that carry air in and out of your lungs. The signs and symptoms are a persistent cough that produces thick mucus, wheezing, breathlessness, exercise intolerance, repeated lung infections, and inflamed nasal passages or a stuffy nose. The next will be digestive signs and symptoms. The thick mucus can also block tubes that carry digestive enzymes from your pancreas to your small intestine. Without these digestive enzymes, your intestines aren't able to completely absorb nutrients in the food you eat. The result is often foul-smelling greasy stools, poor weight gain and growth, intestinal blockage, particularly in newborns, and severe constipation.
Cystic fibrosis is known as the most common lethal autosomal recessive genetic disorder. Autosomal recessive meaning that two copies of the abnormal gene must be present in order for the disease or trait to develop. 1 in 25 of us actually carry the faulty gene for cystic fibrosis, but sadly we never know of it. An offspring must inherit two copies of the CFTR gene that contains mutation in order to get cystic fibrosis. However, to make it sound better, if both parents have the cystic fibrosis gene, there's only a 1 in 4% chance that the offspring can get it. Secondly, if a cystic fibrosis positive individual were to have a child with a cystic fibrosis carrier, the chances are that 50% that the child will have cystic fibrosis, and the other 50% would be that the child is a carrier but will not show or have cystic fibrosis.
To finish off the video, we'll give a brief summary of the content that we covered. The first main thing that we talked about were the areas that cystic fibrosis affects, namely the lungs, pancreas, liver, kidneys, and intestines. Following that, we covered the symptoms of the disease. For this, there are two main types of symptoms that appear. These are respiratory symptoms and digestive symptoms. The last thing we talked about was patterns of inheritance. Remember that cystic fibrosis is an autosomal recessive disease and that two carrier parents are required in order to have a child with cystic fibrosis.